Good afternoon, and welcome to the book of Malachi, first chapter. And what an interesting book. And you'll see as we get into it. So we're in chapter 1, verses 1 to 14. The pronouncement of the word of the Lord to Israel through Malachi. All right, so let's take a look at our master map and and just to kind of show us that we're going to be in that area right there. So I'm going to blow that up, and that looks like this, and there is Malachi. So you'll notice that it is near the end of the actual map itself. We don't go much further than this. As a matter of fact, you'll see Joel right below it, and you'll see a question mark behind Malachi and behind Joel, because we're not really sure when either one was written, but we really think that Malachi was written during the time of Nehemiah. And the reason for that will become real evident in the next couple of slides. So I'm pretty sure I agree with everybody that Malachi was probably written during Nehemiah. All right, so let's talk and listen to Wiersbe as he describes where we are in this study. So in 538 BC, Cyrus issued a decree that the Jews exiled in Babylon can return to their land and build the temple. So that's right up there. And you'll remember that because we started talking about that in the studies on Haggai and then also in Zechariah. Then about 50,000 of them accepted the challenge in 515 BC. After much delay, they completed the temple. So there's 515. And we remember that. Remember that Haggai had not, I don't think Haggai was there when the temple was completed. Zechariah most certainly was. Ezra visited them. We're talking about Jerusalem. And from the time of the temple being built until the time of Ezra got there, there was no wall. It was many years before that wall was completed. So he visited them in 458 BC, and in 445 BC, Nehemiah became their governor. So that's all down here. Now, what we really do believe is that Malachi prophesied during the time of Nehemiah. So if that's true, although this map shows Malachi up around the 460, 470 time zone, we really think he might have been down around the 445. We don't really know for sure when Malachi made his predictions, but it does seem, because of the things that he was talking about and the things that Nehemiah was struggling with, that it was during the same time. So we're not sure about Malachi, and we're not sure about Joel as to when they actually prophesied. All right, so while Nehemiah was back in his post in Shushan, that's in Nehemiah chapter 13, things began to fall apart in Jerusalem. And when he returned, man, he had some drastic steps. So it's possible that Malachi was called in to expose the problems. And that's what you're going to see in Malachi, that the things that Nehemiah was running into are the same things that Malachi preaches against. And so you'll see it here. He deals with the poor crops and faltering economy, intermarriage with the heathen, defilement of the priesthood, oppression of the poor, lack of support for the temple, general disdain of religion, and so all those things at the same time. G. Campbell Morgan says exactly the same. G. Campbell Morgan says there was a corrupted priesthood, there were saved individuals marrying unsaved individuals, and the tithes weren't coming in to support the ministry. And so you'll see that right here. Morgan says this: if you compare Nehemiah to Malachi, you're going to see some of the same things. So here's Nehemiah 13. Remember them, O God, O my God, because they have defiled the priesthood and the covenant of the priesthood and of the Levites. And here's Malachi 2:8. But you have departed out of the way. You have caused many to stumble at the law. You have corrupted the covenant of Levi. Okay, here's another one. This is, again, chapter 13. This is 23 to 27. And you'll see that he complains about the peculiar people of God have entered into an unholy alliance with idolatries. Malachi, chapter 2, 10 to 16, same thing. And then again, Nehemiah chapter 12, verse 10, I perceived that the portions of the Levites had not been given them, for the Levites and the singers that did the work, everyone fled to his field. All right, and the same thing happens in Malachi, where he's saying, "Bring into the storehouse the tithes of the Lord." So everything that we're looking at kind of indicates that Malachi prophesied during the time of Nehemiah. And it's very evident that the temple is built during the time of Malachi. So that means that he either had to prophesy way back at the time of Nebuchadnezzar, or he's prophesying during this second temple. And because the complaints are the same, we really feel he prophesied during the time of Nehemiah. Okay, so pronouncement. The word pronouncement in verse 1 is the same word that we got for burden that we saw back in Zechariah, that masa. And so he's saying, all right, it says here, the word of Yahweh renews prophecy along the lines of earlier prophecy. And we said that in 2 or 3 times in the earlier studies, that this prophecy is repeating earlier prophecy. Malachi, and this is a keel. The circumstances of Malachi's life are so entirely unknown that it's a disputed point whether his name, Malachi, my messenger, is the name of a person or the name of a prophet who's telling what he's doing. So we don't know, is Malachi his real name, or is Malachi his title? Most of the people are feeling that Malachi is his name. We won't know until we get to heaven. Okay, so he says this in verse 2, I have loved you, but you say, how have you loved us? And then he says, was Esau not Jacob's brother? Yet I have loved Jacob. Okay, so the NLT paraphrase really catches the sadness. He says, I have loved you deeply. And they retort, really? Yeah, really. And how have you loved us? I showed my love for you by loving your ancestor Jacob. And you're going to see this, how have we loved you? And you'll see it very shortly. There's a note from Precept Often, I think, that talks about the number of times that in the King James you see whither have you loved us, or whither have you done this, or how have you loved us, and we're going to see that shortly. Here it is. This is Morgan, G. Campbell Morgan. We now come to consideration the condition of the people, and this is sad. I mean, it is absolutely sad. You have a people that were put into exile, came out of exile, then they built a temple, and by the blessings of the Lord, and it was very evident that they were being blessed by the Lord, but then they went bad. So he says, there's a key word in the book revealing this condition, a word these people use to reply to every message with the prophet delivered to them, and that word is wherein. There it is, wherein. And in the King James or the New American Standard, it's how. And you're going to see this here again and again. Here it goes. So in verse 1, verse 2, chapter 1, verse 2, we just did it. How have you loved us? How have we despised thy name? How have we defiled thee? For what reason? How have we wearied him? How shall we return? How have we robbed thee? What have we spoken against you? And in every case, the Lord is saying something through Malachi to these people, and they're doubting it. Oh, come on, prove it to me. And it's a sad book, and he really gets our attention. I'm going to tell you right now that by the end of this chapter, you're going to have your toes stepped on. Let me just put this: he was jumping all over mine, and it's an interesting chapter. So he says, was not Esau Jacob's brother? Yet I have loved Jacob, but I have hated Esau. And many of the commentators take us to Genesis 29, verses 30 and 31. This is the same word used. So here's the illustration. Jacob had relations with Rachel also. And indeed, he loved Rachel more than Leah. And he served with Laban for another 7 years. Now, when the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, that word unloved is the word for hate here in Malachi. But what's interesting about it is Don't change Malachi to unloved. In other words, I've loved Jacob, but I've unloved Esau. The actual word itself means hatred, personal hatred. Um, and so what it says here in Genesis is the Lord saw that Leah was hated. And what a lot of the commentators want to do, and I don't know if I agree with them, what a lot of commentators want to do is to soften this, I love Jacob, I hated Esau. And I don't see that. But at the same time, I have a problem with that. And I thought it was really interesting, this next comment. Someone said to Gabeline, he said, I have a serious problem with Malachi 1:3, where God said, Esau I have hated. And Dr. Gabeline said, I've got a greater problem, Malachi 1:2, where God said, well, Jacob I loved. And Constable really brings that out. He says it's remarkable that God loved Jacob in view of the person Jacob was. And it's equally remarkable that God hated Esau, because in many ways he was more likable individual than his brother. In other words, Esau got really angry at Jacob, but he had a right to. Jacob messed him up bad. Uh, that was a whole family unit I would not have been wanted to be part of. The relationship of Jacob with Esau versus Jacob with, I'm sorry, Jacob himself as a person with his family versus Esau with his is just strange. The Lord loved Jacob in spite of Jacob. In fact, the Lord loved Israel in spite of Israel. And it really shows the love of the Lord. But I really wish I could answer a question as to what this really means. Some of the commentators really say that the hatred for hatred for Esau really does go back to what he did against Israel, and we're going to see that as we get into this here. So he says, remember, it doesn't concern two brothers, but the posterity of each. That's Clark's comments on that. Now here's their birth. But the children struggled together within her. And she said, if this is so, why am I in this condition? And she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said, there are two nations in your womb. Two peoples will be separated from your body. One people will be stronger than the other. The older will serve the younger. Now that doesn't show a hatred. That just shows prophecy. When her days leading to delivery came to an end, behold, there were twins in her womb. Now the first came out red all over, like a hairy garment, and they named him Esau. And afterward, his brother came out with his hand holding on to Esau's heel. So he was named Jacob. And Isaac was 60 years old when she gave birth to him. So what you see here is a prediction that one will serve the other, that the older will serve the younger. But in life, they really did go in very, very bad directions. You see where Esau again and again and again went after Israel, or went after Jacob. In fact, you can see that coming up. Though Edom says, Edom was the land of and the nation of Esau. We've been beaten down, but we'll return and we'll build up the ruins. This is what the Lord of armies says. They may build, but I'll tear them down. And people will call them the territory of wickedness, and the people with whom the Lord is indignant forever. And what Clark says is that pulling down that was predicted here was accomplished by Judas Maccabees. And you can see that in Josephus' Antiquities as to what really did happen. And your eyes will see this, and you will say, the Lord be exalted beyond the border of Israel. And if you remember the relationship between the children of Israel and the children of Esau, there was a constant battle between them. And Esau went out of their way, the children of Esau went out of their way to hurt the children of Israel. And that hatred was from the time of Jacob and Esau all the way through to today. And so you'll see this as we go. Malicious pleasure in looking on the misery of Judea and Jerusalem had been the special sin of Edom. Now God would show Judah the fruit of its reversal and his goodness towards them. So in other words, what happened in the previous verses is he's saying, Edom, you start building up, I'm going to break it down. And then the children of Israel will look at that and go, the Lord be exalted. He's not only protecting us here, he's stopping them there. And this came from gotquestions.org. Why did God judge Edom so harshly in the book of Obadiah? Well, he says this, look at their heart. The arrogance of your heart has deceived you. The one who lives in the cleft of the rock on the height of the dwelling place, who says in his heart, who will bring me down to earth? Because they felt there was just no way anybody could hurt them. 110, because of the violence to your brother Jacob, shame will cover you, and you will be eliminated forever. 112, don't gloat over your brother's day in the day of his misfortune. Do not rejoice over the sons of Judah in the day of their destruction. Yet do not boast on the day of their distress. Next one. 113, do not enter the gate of my people on the day of their disaster. You indeed do not gloat over the catastrophe on the day of their disaster. Do not lay a hand on their wealth. In other words, when I come in to judge the children of Israel, you stay out. And don't you go using it as an opportunity, because that's where their head was and their heart was. Do not stand at the crossroad to eliminate their survivors. Those people that finally made it out of the city and were surviving, don't you hand them on over. So you can see where that enemy of Israel really was at that time, and you still see it today. So Constable, the point of this message was to get the Jews of the restorative community who were thinking that God had abandoned them and forgotten his promises to think again. Right? So he's saying, look, even though you folks feel that God's against you and against them, you need to take a look at what I've done for you and where my heart is. And don't forget, I opened this chapter, I love you. And they're going, how have you loved us? Which is really horrible. And he's going to go through and show them the fact of his love. But what he's going to show them first is who they are and what they are doing and where their heart is. And you're going to see that very shortly. A son honors his father, a servant his master. Then, if I'm a father, where's my honor? And if I'm a master, where's my respect? Says the Lord of armies to you, the priest, who despise my name. But you say, how have we despised your name? So he says to the priest, and he says, what is here is addressed in particular to the priest. Why? Because they were chosen, they were appointed, their office was to honor and glorify me, the Lord. You might be the first and the foremost to do it, but instead you've been the first to dishonor me. And so what he's doing very early in this chapter and this book is putting his hands on the priest and saying, priest, you're supposed to represent me. You are supposed to intercede to me for your people. You are supposed to represent what true devotion is all about, and you're not doing it. How you know this? Because you're presenting defiled food upon my altar. But you say, how have we defiled you? In that you say, the table of the Lord is be despised. So he's saying, you're desecrating my altar with defiled food. You're despising it. You're disesteeming it. You're saying it's contemptible. And another point here. Look at what Barnes says at the very end of that one. He says this, and so any contemptible thing might be offered on it. And so what you're going to see over these next verses is they have placed the whole sacrificial system as a burden, as a bother, as who cares, and therefore you can bring whatever you want, because it won't really matter. It's just work, right? And so he says, Benson says, by your actions you declare how little value you have for the worship of God, since you care not how slight or contemptuous that matter is performed. And so Septuagint, and that you say the table of the Lord is polluted, and that was set thereon you have despised. So what are they doing? They have a responsibility given to them by God to represent the people to God and represent God to the people. They see it as a job. They see it as something they got to do. Are you getting close to us? Uh, think about the fact of us worshiping. Think about the fact of us going to church. Think about us giving our tithes. Think about us attending the services. Why are we doing it? Where's your heart? And I don't know your heart because I'm speaking into a microphone right now, and I don't know everybody that I'm speaking to. But I know that for myself, this got to my head and my heart, because there's some times, and I know it's not just me, but there's some times we go because we're supposed to go, and he may be speaking to us. Now here's what he says: when you present a blind animal for sacrifice, is it not evil? When you present a lame or a sick animal, is that not evil? So offer it to your governor. Would he be pleased with you? Or would you receive you kindly? Right? So he says this. Barnes takes us over to Deuteronomy. If it has any impairment, such as a limp or blindness or serious, you shall not sacrifice to the Lord. So he's saying to them, look, when you allow people to come up, give you a blind animal, or an animal that's sick, or an animal that's lame, try something. Try offering it to the governor. See what kind of respect you get. Now, there's a couple of good points here. The very fact that it says governor tells you when this occurred. In other words, prior to this, there was a king. And after the kings of Persia, they were being ruled by a governor. So it kind of pushes again to the fact that we're probably talking to the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. And then he just mocks them. So, grab a lame beast and take it over to Nehemiah and offer it to him. See how it goes. That's what he's saying to him. And yet you are offering that to me, the God of the universe. And one of the authors, one of the commentators says, so you go to church and stick $1 in the offering. What are you doing? Well, I don't need it. I'll give it to the Lord. Why? Well, it looks good when I put $1 in there and people think I'm giving money. Where's your heart? Interesting. So this one by Wiersbe is wonderful. And just let me read this one. Over the years, I've participated in many ordination examinations, and I look for 4 characteristics in each candidate. First of all, a personal experience of salvation through faith in Jesus Christ. Number 2, a sense of calling from the Lord. Number 3, a love for and a knowledge of the Word of God. And number 4, a high respect for the work of the ministry. Whenever we've examined a candidate who was flippant about ministry, who saw it as a job and not a divine calling, he didn't get my vote. Whether as a pastor, missionary, teacher, choir member, usher, being a servant of God is a serious thing, and it deserves the very best we can give. That's something? I mean, I don't know about you, but this one's been striking chords in me. It's not that I do it all the time, but I know there are times that I'm doing something as a job and not as a ministry. The wonderful, beautiful news about teaching Sunday schools is the excitement of it, but There's other things in my life that I go because I'm supposed to go. And it's like, come on, Ken. Um, are you in the ministry? Are you to be representing the Lord to people? Um, are, this is important. So G. Campbell Morgan says this: to carry offerings to the house of God simply because it's commanded is guilty of sacrilege. There's only one motive sufficiently strong to maintain the relationship between the heart of God and the heart of man, and that's love. This was pretty interesting. This one got my head. Listen to this one. Sacrilege, we've always thought, was breaking into a church and stealing from it. That's not so. It's going to the church and putting something in the plate. Sacrilege is centered in offering God something that costs nothing because you think God is worth nothing. God looks for the giving at his altar from a gift that costs something. Men are perpetually bringing in the Christian church the things they don't need themselves. That's an interesting statement. But now, do indeed plead for God's favor, so he'll be gracious. With such an offering on your part, will he receive any of you kindly? That's an interesting statement. He's saying to them, look, this is where your heart is. And then you want to come to me and you want to ask for my help and my favor, and my movement into your life, then we got to straighten this out. Am I going to deal with you kindly if you're going to keep that up? And that's what he's saying to these individuals. In order to close them that they're wrong in the most striking manner, the prophet asked them if the governor would accept such prayers. And then he draws this conclusion, that God would not hear the prayers of the priests for the people. Then he says, he makes a grand statement. If only there was one among you who would shut the gates, so that you would not kindle a fire on my altar for nothing. I'm not pleased with you, said the Lord of armies, nor will I accept an offering from your hands. I love it. Cost you nothing. Look at the word in the Greek, or in the Hebrew, gratis. It's gratis. Doesn't cost you anything. Right? And he says, literally, a present I do not accept of your hand. And we see this in Isaiah, and we see this in Amos. Here's Isaiah. What are your many sacrifices to me, says the Lord? I've had enough of burnt offerings of rams and fatted calves. I take no pleasure in the blood of bulls and lambs and goats. When you come to appear before me, who requires of you this trampling of my courtyards? Do not go on bringing me your worthless offering. Incense is an abomination to me. New moon and Sabbath, the proclamation of assembly. I cannot endure wrongdoing and the festive assembly. See what he's saying? Get away from me with this religion. Give me your hearts. Amos, I reject your festivals, nor do I delight in your festive assemblies. Even though you offer up to me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. I will not even look at the peace offerings of your fatted oxen. Take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not even listen to the sound of your harps. But let justice roll like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. What's he saying? I want your heart. That's what he's saying. For from the rising of the sun even to the setting, my name shall be great among the nations. And in every place frankincense is going to be offered in my name, and a grain offering that's pure, for my name shall be great among the nations. And I didn't get this one right away until one of the commentators reminded me that the word nations is Gentiles. And so the nation is the Goy. See that? G-O-Y. You talk to a Jewish person, they'll talk about the Goy. They're talking about the Gentiles. They're talking about us. And not usually in a real polite way. So the Septuagint translates this in a present tense. And there really is a discussion, and we're going to have, there's a note at the very bottom of this page that you're going to see. Some of the translations translate this in present tense, and some of the translations translate this in future tense. like in the future this is going to happen. But if you put this into the present tense, like the Septuagint does, it really gives you an interesting discussion. He said, for from the rising of the sun even to the going down thereof, my name has been glorified among the Gentiles. So what's happening? The Jewish nation is bored with the sacrifices. It's a burden to them. But the Gentiles are excited about the Lord. That's one translation. The other translation, if you make it future tense, is it will come in the future. The Gentiles will be excited about the Lord. We know that the second one, that the future is true. But if you look at this verse and then the next verse, it kind of says, you folks who should be the blessing are not. And the Gentiles are excited about me, but you are not. Verse 12 will tell us that. So, you priests disparage my offering. They, the Gentiles, honor and worship me. Now, Precept Austin says these versions translate in the future sense, whereas these versions translate it as the present tense. So there really is a discussion as to what's the translation here, but the net is the same. The Gentiles either are or will be praising the Lord, while those that should be with him are bored. My son said when he first got into the youth ministry, and he was in Chicago, going through Moody Bible Institute, he said, I would much rather deal with inner city Chicago kids than I would with second generation Christian kids. And we, as second generation, third generation, fifth generation, if we're not careful, we get bored. We just know all this. And those to which it is new, to which they realize how bad they are and are coming to him, are excited about him and just enthused about him. And what he's saying to these individuals and possibly to us is, you got to go back to your early beginnings, the excitement you had when you first came to the Lord, realizing who you are and what he has done for you. And that changes the whole outlook. And so in verse 12, he said, but you're profaning it by you saying the table of the Lord is defiled, and as for its fruit, is despised. The idea is that you're breaking it down. You're profaning it. You're disesteeming it. And first of all, he says, what are they profaning? And what they really are profaning, because of their actions, they're actually profaning the great name of the Lord. So he's the one that gave it to them. He's the one that provided for them. He is the one that is allowing them to have the love that he's got for them. He's the one that allowing them to worship. He's the one that's meeting their needs. And by making it boredom and not worshiping and not understanding and not coming to him from a heart of graciousness, of gratitude, they are de-esteeming his name. And so what Constable said, it's one of the bookends that flanks that central command: shut the church doors. I've seen this happen. Couldn't understand it. Wondering why the Lord didn't step in certain situations. Now I'm beginning to say, okay, people have gone to you, not you personally in this conversation, but in a church that I know, people have gone to you, tried to explain to you where you're going wrong, and you're missing it. And after a while, the Lord is saying, okay, let's shut these doors. Because what you're doing is not what I want you to do. What you're doing is having a social club. And who's ever top of the heap gets the accolades, and the bottom gets messed up. So yeah, this I understand. You also say how tiresome it is. You view it as trivial. And then you bring what's taken by robbery, what's lame or sick. And that robbery word is an interesting word. We'll come right to it in a second. So he said it's distressing. You know, I'm bored. I don't want to be here. I'm here because I'm supposed to be here. No, that's not what he's looking for. And he says how tiresome it is. And that it is masculine singular. So in a sense, you could be saying how tiresome you are, referring to the Lord. Trivial. I mean, and you'll see this in the King James and some other ones. The word trivial is usually be puffed at. It's the idea of, like, or sniffing at. That's another way of saying it. And Clark says it's a metaphor taken from cattle which don't like the fodder. They blow strongly through their nose, and after this, neither they nor any of the cattle will eat it. So he's saying you're treating it as something you blow at or you sniff at. That's the Hebrew. Okay? And that word robbery can mean violence. So in other words, that which is taken by violence, like stolen, or it actually could be something tore apart. I mean, like you're driving down the road and you see a dead deer and you use it as your sacrifice. I mean, that's the concept. So you're bringing the scraps to the Lord. And he said, should I accept it? And so the last verse, cursed be the swindler who has a male in his flock and vows it, but sacrifices the blemished animal to the Lord. Okay? What is he talking about? In other words, and this is really important, he's saying the swindler is the individual who has exactly what the Lord wants in his flock, and he vows to give it to the Lord, but then sacrifices something worthless. Now, where's the sin? Well, the sin is double. Number one, you vowed to give that, and you substitute it. So you look really good in front of the rest of the people, but you gave them less. And remember the story of Ananias and Sapphira, where they sold a piece of land, and they had this much money. And then when they brought money to the church, he said, is this what you sold it for? So let's make it really simple. Let's say they sold it for $100 and they brought 75 to the church. So Peter says to them, did you sell it for 75? And they went, yeah. And Peter says, you're lying to the Lord, right? He said, when the $100 was in your hands, it was your money. You can do what you want. You want to give it to the Lord, you can give it to the Lord. You want to keep it, you can keep it, right? But what you did was you lied to the Lord. So you said, I got $75 from this thing. I'm giving it all to the Lord. No, it wasn't. That's where you lied to the Lord. And that's what he's saying to them. He says, you got a male in the flock. You can do what you want with it. If you want to give it to the Lord, give it. If you don't want to give it to the Lord, you don't have to give it. But don't promise it and then give garbage. And that's what he's saying. This is the Ananias and Sapphira one. Because you're acting treacherously. And Cole does a wonderful job of closing this chapter by asking some really important questions. Here we go. Is your service for God less than what you would offer a human dignitary? Now, I thought it was pretty interesting because what he does in his illustration is you're preparing for Sunday school, you're preparing for church, and some famous person walks in. David Jeremiah shows up at church, and you know it. You know he's coming. So it's Monday, and you got to preach on Sunday, and you find out David Jeremiah's coming. Do you train harder for him? Right? Where's your heart? Who are you doing it for? Is your service for God less than you would offer a human dignitary? One of the things my mother used to jump on us for is don't ever have a brief devotional. In other words, it's Sunday night, let's have a brief devotional. No. If I'm going to the nursing home, give them a full message. If I'm going to preach on a Sunday night and there's nobody here, give them a full message. In other words, do what you're supposed to do with that. Number two, is God answering your prayers? Loaded question. Is he answering your prayers? If he's not, is there something going on in your heart, your life, right? Is the problem you, or is the problem me? Are you playing church? I mean, if you are, if I am, we got to quit. That's what he's saying is, look, you might as well shut the door if you're playing church. I don't need your offering. I don't need your sacrifice. You're not giving an offering because I need it. You're giving an offering so you get blessed. You're giving a sacrifice because you get blessed. You're giving an offering so you can bless the world. You're giving a sacrifice so you can bless the world. Are you bored with the worship or the Christian service? Okay, is it you? Is it them? Is your passion in life to promote God's glory among the nations? Good questions. And give it some thought. I loved this lesson. I'll see you next week for chapter 2.